You know, we were talking about how mushrooms make their spores, and most of what we've found up until this point, you look on the underside to see where the spores come from. But here's a couple of exceptions. The first one is this little thing. It's a type of cup fungus. It's called the orange peel fungus. You can see why it looks like a little piece of orange peel. It forms this little cup, and so when it rains, it captures the rain, and the spores mix in with the water, and then when insects come to it and carry that away, they're carrying the spores on their feet. And so it spreads its spores around like that. And this one is a type of club fungus. It's called an earth tongue. There's several different types of earth tongues. We also have some that are really dark black, but this particular one has this sort of bright yellow color, and it's called the golden earth tongue. And the spores are produced in it along the top of the club. So it just kind of grows straight up. This one's kind of curved over. That's not necessarily typical, but it forms its spores up in the top of the club, and then they're spread by just the air stirring around. So one of the things that I read recently is that mushrooms can actually give off enough moisture to change the humidity differential and make the spores go up above the cap. So they're not just going down, you know, where the mushroom is like only on a stem, maybe 2 or 3 inches long. If you look, they'll come around the cap and up, and then they're carried by the air, by the wind. Oh my goodness, goodies. This one's another type of coral mushroom, and it produces its spores on the tips of each one of these little corals. And you can see it's many branched, and this belongs to a group of corals that have several, you know, pretty decent edibles in them. This is one of them, the gold tip coral, and they're called ramarias. So this is a nice one.
Rama means branch in Spanish, so lots of branches, ramaria.
Ramaria, yeah, many branched. So here's another milk mushroom, and you can see this one looks dark underneath, and so at first glance you'd think it's really old, but I bet you if you cut into the flesh, that's not necessarily true. But where insects have started to attack the underside, it's staining. And so every time you touch it and you see the white milk come out, then that milk will turn to this darker color, and then it'll take on this really fishy kind of odor. And so this is another one of our very choice edibles. This is one of our favorites in the summer. There's 2 sister species that are very similar that have a lot of the same characteristics. This one is called Lactarius corrugus because it has this sort of corrugated texture to the top of the cap. So Lactarius corrugus. The other one is that we looked at earlier is Lactarius volumus, which means voluminous latex or lots of latex. This is it. So you can see they're very similar. They have a lot of the same qualities, same odor, and the same culinary characteristics, but they're actually 2 separate species. Both are mycorrhizal. They live in symbiosis with trees, hardwood trees. So Lactarius volumus, Lactarius corrugus.
You know that thing about mycorrhizal, you know, like all these trees here, you think, oh God, I got a fungus infection, now I'm in trouble. You know, well, it turns out with plants, a fungus infection is essential for their growth. All these trees are hooked up with different kinds of fungus. You think about it, you ever sprouted a bean and watched the bean sprout? You see those little tiny root hairs that come off? Those root hairs are single cells. They're visible macroscopic single cells. I mean, that's big and kind of a gross organ, and that's as fine as the root gets. So you can imagine, here this thing is trying, what do these plants eat? They eat light and they suck dirt, right? And they grow, and they produce wood, and they produce fruit, and they produce shade. So here it goes, eating light, sucking dirt, and they don't have any fine organisms. They got to reach into this dirt. It's like you're putting your finger in there, going, we try to get some nutrients out of this soil. You know, you can't hardly do it, and a plant can't hardly do it either. But what happens is the fungus will come in and grow either into between the cells or around the cells, on the outside of the cells, and it'll expand the root surface of the plants, the absorptive surface, hundreds of times. And so that's why this mycorrhizal, myco fungus, rhizal root, fungus root. And so that's the big connection, as like Ken was saying. And that's why a lot of times, you know, I remember being with one sharp naturalist. We were walking along. He goes, "Oh yeah, I guess we must be under an ash tree here." I said, "How do you know?" He says, "There's an ash tree mushroom." We look up, there's an ash tree.
Yeah.
And he knew by the mushroom what trees were there. So it's kind of amazing. Now some of these fungus will attach to many different kinds of trees. But that's part of that wood wide web we're talking about. All this mycorrhizal, all these myceliums just traveling through the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of the important things to note when you pick a mushroom is where is it growing? Look around and see what kind of trees are growing around it, because as Doug said, a lot of the mycorrhizal fungi will only grow with one species or one family, or like in the pines, maybe 2-needled pine or 3-needled pine or whatever. And then others are more general. But lots of different types of mycorrhizal fungi, the most famous being, of course, the Paragoid truffles, which are mycorrhizal and grow underground. But most of the mycorrhizal fungi that are sold in the markets are wild collected because it's not easy to cultivate. You have to cultivate the tree to cultivate the mushroom. So, and that's being done with truffles at least at this point, but it's still not turned into a lucrative business, I think. So, well, there's still a lot of discussion about whether morels are mycorrhizal or not. Most mycologists would tend towards saying that they're not. There's some evidence that they might have some association with some of the trees they grow with. That's not necessarily a mycorrhizal relationship. So, you know, so little is understood about that morels, you know, there's a guy got a patent on a process to cultivate morels many years ago, but he hadn't set the world on fire. You know, even the ones that they did cultivate just weren't of the same quality. So I think some of these things may just be so wild that, you know, we have to go out and where they are to find them. So this has this bulb at the base, and then the top, the cap has not opened yet. So it's like in its early stages. So if you imagine this as being an egg, so this is like an egg, and it has a membrane around it, and then the stem begins to elongate, the cap starts to open up, and the membrane is stuck to the cap, and as the cap opens, it stretches it and it breaks up into patches. And so this is a type of Amanita. And so the membrane that's left on the top is, you know, in the mature mushroom is what often looks a little bit like coconut flakes that's sprinkled on the top of the mushroom. And so this is a type of Amanita, and because of this, like you can see where I'm handling it and it's turning that reddish color, it's one of the blusher Amanitas, which is actually an edible Amanita, although, you know, you don't want to eat any Amanita unless it's like really identified by somebody who really you can trust. But this is one of the blusher Amanitas. So. More.
Right back.
So these are more of the Cinnabar Chanterelles. So we're keeping them aside, and we're going to make a garnish for the meal with them. Yes.
Greg Carter came to our mushroom cultivation workshop. He told me something I'd never heard before. I wonder if you've ever heard it. He said that shiitakes, which have a significant amount of vitamin D in them, have the vitamin D increased by 3 times if you put them gill side up in the sun for 2 hours. Ever heard anything like that?
No. I haven't heard it, but...
Doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it is true.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't Stamets figure that out?
Okay. Got it from Stamets.
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
With the gills up in the sun.
And now, Doug, do you know if that it only applies to shiitakes or does it apply to other?
I don't know. But we've been doing that just because we heard that's true.
Well, you know, Doug was saying earlier on about how all this connects with the stories, and within the mushroom world, there's lots and lots of different stories. And, you know, some of them reach the level of myth. My favorite is the one about the mushroom professional who went out and picked mushrooms and killed his whole family. But nobody knows who that person was or the name, or, you know, but everybody's heard the story. So maybe it didn't happen. and maybe it won't happen. Oh, that's nice. More cinnabar chanterelles. So were these down near the stream? Did you find them along the stream?
There.
Oh, cool. What's this, Stump the Chump?
I don't know.
This is also a chanterelle, believe it or not.
Wow.
The little tiny one. It's called Chanterelles minor.
Can you actually see the veins, or you just know it well enough to be able to?
Well, both, but you can see how widely spaced they are, and they're more like ridges than gills. Yeah. So this is called Chanterelles minor, and it almost, you tell people that and it's like, sure, but it is. It is the most diminutive of the chanterelles.
And it's just different, and I've seen it.
And that's another one of the cinnabars, the cinnamon chanterelles.
Are there any highly toxic Lactarius? I know
There-
there's some that are that when you taste the milk tastes like you wouldn't eat them just because the milk tastes so hot.
That's mostly it.
Are they gypsy?
No, this is an Amanita, and this is one of the situations where the whole thing's not there.
Oh.
So the bottom of the stem is missing, but I know this is an Amanita. This is Amanita fulva, which is called the tawny grisette. But when you break it off like that and it doesn't have that bulb on the base, sometimes it's hard to tell if it's an Amanita or not. So that's one of the reasons that we say be sure to try to get, even if it breaks off, bring it to the whatever broke off so that you can verify the identity of it.
That's probably poisonous.
It looks
No.
like that one
No?
called stalked something or another that has a little bump on the top. I can't remember what it's called.
Don't know, but this one,
I could mistake it for that almost.
the little bump on the top is called an umbel,
Okay.
like a navel,
Yeah.
umbilical.
I like that.
Comes from that same. Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that. There you go.
yeah.
Perfect. All you got to do is say it and it happens.
Exactly.
This is Amanita. Mom, mine is down in the water.
No, this is not an Amanita. This is a little bit old to be able to identify it for sure, but it looks like one of the Russulas. It's not bleeding, so it's not a Lactarius. There's a Russula like this that's called Russula brevipies, and it's the mushroom that is parasitized by a mold that converts it to lobster mushroom. So it starts out white and winds up orange. Somebody brought in
I
some
brought some
lobsters,
lobsters, yeah.
possibly, so we'll get a
Boy, I
chance
think-
to. So I'll
What
take
did I
this
find
so we
about
can
a month
compare
later?
them.
Oh,
Yeah. I didn't know that they came out this early. I got a
Could you
patch.
talk about how do most mushrooms have like a whole system underground that like sometimes I see mushrooms on my land, like one in one area and one in the same kind in another area far away, and are they sort of connected underground
They may be
somehow?
the same organism. You know what
Yeah.
the largest living organism on the planet is? A fungus.
Fungus, yeah.
And they found that out by taking samples over many, many acres, and then they took it in and did DNA sequencing, and they discovered that the mushrooms were all the same mushroom. They were growing from the same underground network. So
That's
this
what I'm
network can
wondering, yeah.
cover like very large areas sometimes.
So if you had several of a certain kind of mushroom in an area, then they might all be connected.
Very, very likely.
Uh-huh.
And if not connected in terms of being from the same organism, especially if they're mycorrhizal, they're probably connecting to the root system of the same tree.
Oh.
So they
fascinating.
become like an extension of the root system of the tree.
They're the fine roots. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
I always like to think of it this way, when you're walking through the forest and you look around you at what's growing up there and all the life around you, there's at least as much under your feet. There's as much happening under your feet as there is above your... this is a nice one. So I'm gonna try to keep this one nice and clean. So I'm gonna cut the dirt off the bottom. And you see it's gonna bleed. And so it looks a lot like the two that we just looked at, the Lactarius velimus, Lactarius corrugus. It has the same color of latex. It looks kind of like them, but if you look at the gills, okay, let's compare it. So the gills on this one are much farther apart. See how widely spaced they are? And of course this is younger. It'll take on more of the same form. But this is one that's more typical in higher elevations, and it's called Lactarius hygrophoroides. Hygrophorous or like a waxy cap, but it's a Lactarius. And it will like stain dark, and it'll have that fishy odor, and it's equally good as an edible as these other two. These are the three from that same group that are the best edibles of the Lactarius.
And so it also doesn't have an acrid or hot
No,
taste, yeah.
no. If you taste the milk, you can just touch the tip of your finger to it and touch it to the tip of your tongue safely. And so if it has that mild flavor, it's very likely that you have an edible Lactarius.
And very unlikely that you could make yourself sick, even if it wasn't completely edible. It might just be
Exactly.
not fun to
Exactly.
eat.
We don't like to encourage, using a rule of thumb, but that is a very important one with the Lactarius. If you taste it and it has that peppery, hot quality to it, then you probably don't want to eat it. Now, I say that, and I hear this from a lot of different places. I just recently purchased Alan Bassett's book on the milk mushrooms, and he says that lots of people will cook it, and if it's cooked well, sometimes what causes the acrid part dissipates and it's edible. Another thing that you hear about is in a lot of European countries, they will parboil them and pour the water off and then cook them. I don't do that, and I haven't tried it just because usually at the time you're getting those kinds of mushrooms, you're also getting these choice edibles. So,
see, I end up doing that with these Lactarius, though, because they take so much oil to cook otherwise. So I prefer to parboil them, and then it takes way less oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I save the water because I know the water is good. I
Yeah.
just use it for flavor.
You can also let them dry out a little bit.
If they dry out, they'll cook
put them in
faster?
a paper bag and put them in the fridge for 3 or 4 days, and a lot of the moisture will go out of them, and then they'll cook down a lot easier without so much oil.
I'll try that too. I was just trying to find a way to, I
Yeah,
really
'cause
enjoying them, but I was I'm using
they're like
an
a
awful lot of fat,
sponge.
yeah. They
Oh
just
my
suck it up.
goodness! You're bringing the good ones.
Oh, good.
This is the golden chanterelle,
Oh, really?
and I had brought a few with me, but I'd only found just a handful here up to this point. But this one is one of the most important edibles, and it grows in temperate areas all the way around the world. So it's very highly sought after. In Germany, they call it Steinpil. They call it Pfifferling, the pepper mushroom, because it has a little bit of a spicy flavor to it. But if you smell it, it really is not what we normally would think of a mushroom smell. It's more like a fruit. And so oftentimes when we're cooking this one, we'll put like peaches, dried apricots, something like that in with it. Sometimes throw in some crushed nuts, almonds, something like that. It can be used almost as a dessert. You can make I've made mead using this, and I've made cordials using it, like a schnapps. Makes a really great schnapps. But these are really young ones, and they can get a whole lot larger. And I have some back at the house that we'll be cooking up this evening that are really nice.
I think that's
Lost the stem. It's a milk mushroom.
but not necessarily an edible.
No, this one's going to have the peppery latex. But we'll take it.
Always thinks to take that and taste, but I don't.
Yeah. There's one that looks a lot like this, Lactarius gerardii, but the thing is, and it has the white milk and the wide gills, but this one has this sort of crinkled edge along the edges of it. And this milk, it will, the milk doesn't necessarily change, but the gills will start to turn to kind of a pinkish color after it's been handled. So
Okay, cool.
it's often been mistaken for Lactarius gerardii, but it's not necessarily that harmful, but it's not pleasant to eat because it's a little bit on the acrid side. Another Russula.
cross.
So,
Save my socks for get them dry.
here's our baptism.
Yeah, I think we're gonna cross.
So I can guarantee you that these are some
So.
slick
We'll see how
rocks,
fast we
so
move along.
be careful.
Is there a Lactarius called a chocolate milky cap, or is that just another name for this for the Corrigus?
Chocolate milky. I don't know of one. I mean, it's possible. You know, that's the thing with common names, because so the books that do include common names, like the Audubon Guide, they may have 3 or 4 different common names for the same thing. This one up in West Virginia, if you showed this to anybody up there, they would say, "Oh, that's a Bradley," or in some places they would say, "Oh, leatherback."
Oh,
You know,
okay, yeah.
so it varies from place to place.
Sure, yeah.
In a lot of cases, it's coming from names that the immigrants that came here from other places called them back home.
Okay.
So they had similar species back home that they knew the name for, and so.
But those are the 3 brown Lactarius that are the most edible, or the nicest ones. Those ones you showed us.
The Hygrophoroides, the Lactarius velimus, Lactarius corrugus. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what we know as the
Chocolate milky cap. I think it's the
Chocolate
the,
milky cow. I never heard that.
Chris Parker calls. I think it's Corrugus that.
Uh-huh. No.
Yeah.
I would think more like Gerardii, because the top of it is looks more like chocolate, but there are some that have that color. This is another one of the Lactarius hygrophoroides, and you can see the white milk, the brownish cap, and so this one's a little more mature, so the edges of the cap are starting to turn up, which is very distinctive. It'll often have a very vase kind of shape to it, but the gills are widely spaced. There's a lot of distance between the gills.
And that is edible?
It is. Yeah. So this is one of the most beautiful of the Russulas. We have Russulas are one of the largest genera of fungi that grow here. They're all mycorrhizal with different kinds of trees, but they're red capped, purple cap, green cap, white cap. They have a lot of different colors, and a lot of them, the stems are white. Occasionally you'll find one that has a different color for the stem, but this one is one of the easier ones to identify in the field. It's called Russula flava, or flava, which means yellow or gold. So it has the yellow on the top, much brighter in the center, yellow on the stem, much brighter at the base of the stem, but it still has white gills, and it'll have the sort of buff colored spores. So Russula flava.
Is that edible?
This is one of the edible Russulas. A few of the Russulas are pretty good. There's a lot more of the good edible Russulas out on the West Coast than here, but the problem that I have with them is they're kind of mealy. Yeah. So the texture is not good for like stir frying and that sort of thing. But somebody was talking about it just recently, and they said the best way to use the Russulas, because they do have a really nice flavor, is to use them like in soups or like a sauce or something like that, where the texture is not so important. And so that makes total sense. I would.
That one right there.
Yeah, that is a Russula as well, and you can see that's one of the red Russulas. Now, red Russulas, it's one of those things. It's so hard to identify those in the field, and there's at least 5, maybe as many as 7 different species of red Russulas that grow right here in this area. So some of them are edible, some of them are have the acrid flavor, but generally I just kind of steer clear of eating red Russulas, but other people do. So again, it's a matter of whether it's just edible, non-toxic, or just it's actually choice. So choice is where I tend to land mostly.
How much of the year do you find a lot of edible mushrooms around here?
It depends on the season, but it's not unheard of to find them year-round. especially in a mild winter. And mushrooms do have a pretty distinctive season, but so much of it depends on temperature, and moisture is the main thing.
Yeah.
So like what we're seeing now is kind of an overlap. Some of these are more typical of the mushrooms you would get in the fall, and some of them are more typical summer mushrooms, like the Lactarius start like in July, and the Chanterelles. And so they're kind of towards the end of their season now, and they'll give over to like honey mushrooms and a lot of other species that are a lot more typical in the fall.
Oh, believe.
Yeah.
Whoa. And what's
It's a
that?
major mushroom.
That's another one of those toothed polypores.
Cool.
Is that considered tooth or a pore?
Yeah, it is. It's a toothed polypore,
Okay.
but it's actually in the tooth fungus
See how it
family.
changes color like
Yeah, cool.
But you can see how this one bruises really dark like that, and it has a little bit of a reddish cast to the pores. And so with the boletes, the red pores, that's something that you mostly want to avoid. Most of the toxic boletes are in the group that have the red pores, but not all of them. And this one also has this reddish, almost velvety base to it. So it's called Boletus subvolutipes, like velvet foot, like a velvet foot. No, you wouldn't eat this one. There's one that this is one of the lookalikes to, that would have more of a red stem, wouldn't bruise quite as dark and much more slowly, called Boletus bicolor. And we do have some of those back at the house, so we can compare them.